The blood on Katherine Hayes' hands was still wet when the circuit judge rode into El Dorado Canyon, Nevada, and she knew that no matter what truth she spoke, the law would see only a woman's word against a dead man's reputation. It was July 1878, and the desert heat shimmered off the Rocky Canyon walls like liquid silver. Katherine stood in the sheriff's office, her calico dress torn at the shoulder, her dark hair fallen loose from its pins, and her green eyes hollow with shock. The body of Garrett Sullivan lay in the back room, a kitchen knife buried in his chest, and Katherine's fingerprints were the only ones on the handle. Sheriff Dawson had found her standing over the body in her own kitchen, trembling and covered in blood, unable to speak coherent words for nearly an hour. Now, 3 days later, the circuit judge had arrived. Judge Horace Pemberton was a thin man with silver hair and cold gray eyes that had seen 1,000 defendants and believed maybe a dozen of them. He set up court in the saloon, the only building in El Dorado Canyon large enough to hold the entire town of 200 souls, and called the proceedings to order with 3 sharp raps of his gavel. Katherine sat in a wooden chair facing the judge, her hands folded in her lap to hide their shaking. She had scrubbed the blood away, but she could still feel it on her skin, sticky and warm and terrifying. The town's only lawyer, a drunk named Peterson who owed her late father money, sat beside her with whiskey on his breath and defeat in his eyes. "Katherine Hayes," Judge Pemberton intoned, his voice echoing off the saloon's tin ceiling. "You stand accused of the murder of Garrett Sullivan, a respected businessman of this community. How do you plead?" Katherine's voice came out stronger than she expected. "Not guilty, Your Honor. I killed him, but it was self-defense. He broke into my home and tried to force himself on me." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Katherine saw the faces of her neighbors, people she had known all her 23 years. Some looked sympathetic. Most looked doubtful. Garrett Sullivan had owned the general store and half the mining claims in the canyon. He had been a pillar of the community, a church-going man who smiled and tipped his hat to ladies on the street. Judge Pemberton's expression did not change. "Do you have any witnesses to corroborate this claim?" "No, Your Honor. I was alone in my house. My father died 6 months ago, and I live by myself now." "Any evidence of forced entry?" Katherine swallowed hard. "The back door was unlocked. I had been doing laundry in the yard. He must have come in through the kitchen." "So you have no proof that Mr. Sullivan broke in rather than being invited?" The words hit Katherine like a slap. "I would never invite that man into my home. He had been bothering me for months, making improper suggestions, trying to corner me when I came to the store. I told him to leave me alone, but he would not listen." Judge Pemberton leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. "Miss Hayes, I have been a circuit judge for 27 years. I have heard every manner of story from every manner of defendant. Women of your station often make accusations against men of means when they find themselves in legal trouble. It is the oldest offense in the world." Katherine felt the floor tilt beneath her. "Your Honor, I am telling the truth. He attacked me." I fought back. The knife was on the kitchen table. I grabbed it because I thought he was going to kill me. "Did Mr. Sullivan have any weapons on his person?" "No, but he did not need a weapon. He was twice my size and—" "So you stabbed an unarmed man?" "I stabbed a man who was trying to rape me." Katherine's voice rose, and she heard the desperation in it. "Your Honor, please, I am not lying. Garrett Sullivan was not the man people thought he was. He came to my house that afternoon and forced his way into my bedroom. When I screamed, he put his hand over my mouth. I could not breathe. I thought I was going to die. I managed to get away and run to the kitchen, but he followed me. He grabbed me from behind and tore my dress. The knife was right there on the table. I did not even think. I just grabbed it and swung backward, and then he was on the floor, and there was blood everywhere." She was crying now, the tears streaming down her face despite her best efforts to maintain composure. The memory was too fresh, too visceral. She could still feel Sullivan's hands on her body, still smell the tobacco and sweat on his clothes, still hear the terrible wet sound the knife had made. Judge Pemberton watched her with the expression of a man observing a moderately interesting insect. When she finished, he shuffled through some papers on the makeshift bench in front of him. I have here testimony from 3 witnesses who state that Garrett Sullivan was a man of impeccable character. Mrs. Aldridge, who works at the general store, says he never spoke an improper word in her presence. Reverend Thompson says Sullivan attended church every Sunday and donated generously to the poor. And Mr. Caldwell, who partnered with Sullivan in several mining ventures, says he never knew the man to have so much as raised his voice in anger. Katherine shook her head. They did not know him, not the real him. He was careful. He only showed that side of himself when no one else was around. Or perhaps you are lying to save yourself from the gallows. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Katherine felt Peterson shift uncomfortably beside her, but the lawyer said nothing. He was useless, and they both knew it. Judge Pemberton cleared his throat. Miss Hayes, the law requires evidence, not stories. You have no witnesses, no proof of forced entry, no evidence of a struggle beyond your torn dress, which could have been torn at any time. What you do have is a dead man with your knife in his chest and your admission that you killed him. I am inclined to believe that this was not self-defense, but rather murder, possibly motivated by a financial dispute or a romantic entanglement gone wrong. That is not true! Katherine stood up, her hands gripping the edge of the table. Your Honor, I swear on my father's grave that I am telling the truth. Garrett Sullivan attacked me. I defended myself. That is all that happened. The judge's eyes narrowed. Sit down, Miss Hayes. Your word means nothing in this court without evidence to support it. I will hear from the prosecution's witnesses, and then I will render my verdict. Katherine sank back into her chair, her legs suddenly weak. The prosecutor, a weaselly man named Simmons who had ridden in with the judge, called Sheriff Dawson to the stand. The sheriff testified about finding Katherine in her kitchen, covered in blood, with Sullivan's body on the floor. He described the scene in clinical detail. The position of the body, the angle of the wound, the amount of blood. He made it sound like a slaughterhouse. Then Simmons called Mrs. Aldridge, who testified about Sullivan's good character, and added, almost as an afterthought, that she had seen Katherine and Sullivan talking outside the general store on several occasions, and that Katherine had seemed friendly enough. Did Miss Hayes ever tell you that Mr. Sullivan was bothering her? Simmons asked. Mrs. Aldridge hesitated. Well, no, but she's a private girl. Always has been. So you have no knowledge of any improper behavior on Mr. Sullivan's part? No, sir. Katherine wanted to scream. She had never told Mrs. Aldridge because Mrs. Aldridge was Sullivan's employee and depended on him for her livelihood. Katherine had not told anyone because she had been ashamed, because she had foolishly believed she could handle the situation herself, because in a town as small as El Dorado Canyon, reputations mattered more than truth. The prosecution rested. Judge Pemberton looked at Peterson, who had not asked a single question during the entire proceeding. Does the defense have any witnesses? Peterson stood slowly, his hand braced on the table for support. The defense calls Miss Katherine Hayes. Katherine had already testified, but Peterson seemed to think putting her on the stand again would help. It did not. Simmons tore into her story with savage efficiency, pointing out every inconsistency, every gap in her memory, every moment where fear and trauma had blurred the details. By the time he was finished, Katherine felt like a liar, even though every word she had spoken was true. Judge Pemberton was preparing to render his verdict when the saloon doors swung open and a man walked in from the blazing afternoon sunlight. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean, muscular build of someone who worked hard for a living. His dark hair was long enough to curl at the collar of his faded blue shirt, and his eyes were a striking shade of hazel that seemed to shift between green and gold depending on the light. He wore a gun belt slung low on his hips, though his hands were nowhere near the twin Colts holstered there. Dust covered his boots and his denim trousers, and he walked with the easy confidence of a man who knew his own strength. Katherine recognized him immediately. Michael Kane, a cowboy who worked on the Diamond K Ranch, about 10 miles outside town. She had met him a few times at the general store and once at a church social, but they had never exchanged more than polite pleasantries. He was younger than most of the ranch hands, maybe 26 or 27, and she remembered thinking he had kind eyes. Those eyes were fixed on the judge now, and there was nothing kind in them. "Your Honor," Michael said, his voice carrying easily through the silent saloon, "I have testimony relevant to this case." Judge Pemberton frowned. "The witness list is closed. You should have come forward earlier." "I just rode in from the high country. Took me 3 days. I did not know there was a trial until I stopped at the ranch." Michael walked forward, his spurs jingling softly. "But I know something about Katherine Hayes and Garrett Sullivan, and I reckon you should hear it before you hang an innocent woman." The judge's frown deepened, but he gestured to the witness chair. "Very well. State your name for the record." "Michael Kane. I am a cowboy for the Diamond K, and I have been working in these parts for 4 years." "And what is this testimony you believe to be so crucial?" Michael glanced at Catherine, and she saw something in his expression that made her heart skip, not pity, but anger on her behalf, righteous and fierce. "I saw Garrett Sullivan harassing Miss Hayes on 3 separate occasions. The first was about 5 months ago, outside the general store. I had come to town for supplies, and I saw Sullivan corner Miss Hayes in the alley beside the store. She was trying to leave, and he kept blocking her path. I could not hear what he was saying, but her body language made it clear she did not want to talk to him. When I walked over, Sullivan backed off and acted like nothing was wrong." Judge Pemberton's expression was skeptical. "That hardly constitutes harassment. Let me finish." Michael's voice was calm but firm. "The second time was about 3 months ago. I was delivering a horse to the livery stable, and I saw Sullivan follow Miss Hayes down the street. She kept speeding up, and he kept following her. When she went into the boarding house where Mrs. Chen lives, he stood outside for a good 10 minutes, just watching the door. It made my skin crawl. And I was not the one being watched." "And the third time?" Michael's jaw tightened. "The third time was 6 weeks ago. I had come to town to pick up medicine for one of the ranch hands who had taken sick. It was late afternoon, and most folks were inside eating supper. I was walking back to my horse when I heard a woman's voice saying no very clearly. I followed the sound to the back of the general store, and I saw Sullivan with Miss Hayes pressed against the wall. His hand was on her arm, and she was trying to pull away. When I called out asking if everything was all right, Sullivan let her go and told me to mind my own business. Miss Hayes looked shaken, but she did not say anything. I think she was too afraid." The saloon was dead silent. Catherine stared at Michael Kane, this man who was a near stranger to her, and felt something crack open in her chest. Someone had seen, someone had noticed. She was not crazy, and she was not alone. Judge Pemberton leaned forward. "Why did you not report any of these incidents to the sheriff?" "Because I am a cowboy, Your Honor, and Garrett Sullivan was a rich man. Who do you think the law would have believed?" Michael's voice was bitter. "Besides, I told myself it was not my place to interfere. I figured if Miss Hayes needed help, she would ask for it. I was wrong about that. I should have done something sooner." "This testimony is interesting, Mr. Kane, but it does not prove that Miss Hayes killed Sullivan in self-defense. It merely establishes that he had shown unwanted attention toward her in the past. It establishes that Katherine Hayes was telling the truth," Michael said, and his voice rang out like a bell. "You said her word meant nothing. You called her a liar without any evidence, just because she is a woman and Sullivan was a man with money and connections. But I am telling you, under oath, that everything she said about Sullivan's behavior was true. He was stalking her. He was harassing her. And if he felt bold enough to do those things where someone might see, what do you think he was capable of when he got her alone?" Catherine pressed her hand to her mouth, trying to hold back a sob. Michael Kane was fighting for her in a way no one else had, not even her useless lawyer. He was standing up to a judge and a room full of people, risking his own reputation, because he believed her. Judge Pemberton's expression was unreadable. "You make a compelling argument, Mr. Kane, but the law requires more than supposition." Then consider this, Michael said. When Sheriff Dawson examined Sullivan's body, did he note any defensive wounds on the man's hands or arms? The sheriff, still sitting in the front row, cleared his throat. There were some scratches on his forearms and one on his neck. Scratches consistent with someone fighting him off? Could be. Michael turned back to the judge. And Miss Hayes had bruises on her arms and neck, did she not? Bruises shaped like fingerprints? Katherine had not mentioned the bruises, but they were there, purple and ugly under her long sleeves. Sheriff Dawson nodded slowly. She did. I noted them in my report. So we have a pattern of harassment, physical evidence of a struggle, and Katherine Hayes' consistent testimony about what happened. What more evidence do you need, Your Honor? If this was a man claiming self-defense, would you be so quick to dismiss his word? The judge was silent for a long moment. The entire saloon seemed to hold its breath. Katherine could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. Finally, Judge Pemberton spoke. Mr. Kane, you have given me much to consider. However, I am troubled by the fact that you did not come forward sooner with this information about Mr. Sullivan's behavior. I am troubled by that too, Your Honor, Michael said quietly. I will have to live with that mistake for the rest of my life, but I am here now and I am telling the truth. Katherine Hayes is not a murderer. She is a woman who fought for her life against a man who would not take no for an answer. And if this court hangs her for that, then the law is not justice. It is just another way for powerful men to silence the women they hurt. The words hit like a thunderclap. Several people in the crowd gasped. Judge Pemberton's face turned red with anger. You are dangerously close to contempt of court, Mr. Kane. Then hold me in contempt, Michael said. But do not punish Katherine Hayes for the crime of surviving. The two men stared at each other, and Katherine saw something shift in the judge's expression. It was not agreement exactly, but perhaps the smallest crack in his certainty. Judge Pemberton turned to the sheriff. Sheriff Dawson, I want you to answer a question honestly. Based on your years of experience in law enforcement and setting aside any personal feelings about the parties involved, does the evidence support Miss Hayes' claim of self-defense? The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. Katherine knew he had been friends with Sullivan, had played cards with him every Saturday night. But he was also a fundamentally decent man who took his job seriously. The evidence does not contradict her claim, Your Honor. The bruises on her arms were fresh, probably made within hours of Sullivan's death. The scratches on Sullivan's arms could have come from her fighting him off, and the angle of the knife wound suggests it was made by someone shorter than Sullivan, swinging upward in a defensive motion rather than a planned attack. Judge Pemberton drummed his fingers on the bench. The silence stretched out, taut as a wire. Very well, the judge said at last. In light of Mr. Kane's testimony and the sheriff's analysis of the physical evidence, I find that there is reasonable doubt as to whether Katherine Hayes committed murder. The charge is reduced to self-defense, and Miss Hayes is hereby acquitted of all charges. The gavel came down, and the sound was like the gates of heaven opening. Katherine could not breathe, could not think, could only feel the overwhelming rush of relief that left her dizzy and gasping. She was free. She was not going to hang. She was going to live. People were talking all around her, some angry, some approving. Peterson was shaking her hand and taking credit for the victory, but Katherine only had eyes for Michael Kane, who was standing by the bar with his hat in his hands, watching her with an expression she could not quite read. She pushed through the crowd, ignoring the people trying to speak to her, until she stood in front of him. "Thank you," she said, and her voice broke on the words. "Thank you for believing me. Thank you for speaking up. I do not know how to repay you." Michael shook his head. "You do not owe me anything, Miss Hayes. I only did what I should have done weeks ago. I am sorry I did not help you sooner. Maybe if I had spoken up the first time I saw Sullivan bothering you, none of this would have happened. You cannot blame yourself for what he did." Katherine reached out and touched his arm, a brief, tentative gesture. You saved my life today. That is what matters. His hazel eyes met hers, and Catherine felt something stir in her chest, something that had nothing to do with gratitude and everything to do with the way he looked at her like she was someone worth saving, worth fighting for. I am glad you are all right, Michael said softly. Truly glad. They stood there for a moment longer, the noise of the saloon fading into the background, and Catherine thought about how strange it was that this man, this near stranger, had seen her and believed her when the rest of the world had been ready to call her a liar and a murderess. Would you let me buy you a drink? She asked impulsively. Or dinner? I know it is not much, but I would like to thank you properly. Michael smiled, and it transformed his face, making him look younger and less careworn. I would like that, Miss Hayes. I would like that very much. Catherine woke the next morning in her own bed, in her own house, and lay there for a long moment, simply marveling at the fact that she was alive. The past few days had felt like a nightmare, and now that it was over, she half expected to find that it had all been some terrible dream. But the torn dress hanging on the back of her chair was real, and the faint bruises on her arms were real, and so was the memory of standing in that saloon, hearing the judge say she was free to go. And so was Michael Kane. She had spent 2 hours with him the previous evening, sharing a meal at the boarding house while the sun set over the canyon. They had talked about simple things at first: the weather, the cattle business, the challenges of living in such a remote place. But as the evening wore on, the conversation had deepened. Michael told her about growing up in Texas, about losing his parents to fever when he was 16, about drifting west in search of work and purpose. Catherine told him about her father, a mining engineer who had brought her to El Dorado Canyon when she was a child, about learning to run a household after her mother died, about the loneliness of the past 6 months since her father's passing. They had not talked about the trial except in passing. It was too raw, too recent. But Catherine had felt something growing between them during that meal, a connection that went beyond gratitude or sympathy. Michael Kane was easy to talk to, easy to be with. He listened when she spoke and asked thoughtful questions. He did not try to fill every silence with chatter, but when he did speak, his words mattered. When he walked her home, he tipped his hat at her doorstep and told her to send word to the Diamond K if she ever needed anything. Then he had mounted his horse and ridden off into the darkness, and Catherine had gone inside feeling strangely bereft. Now, in the clear light of morning, she realized she wanted to see him again. Not because she owed him anything, but because she liked him. It was a startling realization. She had spent the past several months being courted, if that was the word for it, by Garrett Sullivan, and the experience had left her feeling hunted and afraid. But Michael Kane made her feel something entirely different. Safe, yes, but also seen and valued. She got up and dressed, choosing a simple blue cotton dress and braiding her hair. Her hands were steadier than they had been in days. The house still bore the marks of what had happened. There was a dark stain on the kitchen floor that no amount of scrubbing would remove, and she had broken down and cried twice while trying to clean it, but she was determined to keep living here. This was her home, the house her father had built. She would not let Sullivan's ghost drive her out. She was making coffee when someone knocked on the front door. Catherine's first instinct was fear, a reflexive tightening in her chest, but she forced it down and went to answer. Michael Kane stood on her porch, holding his hat and looking slightly uncomfortable. "Morning, Miss Hayes," he said. "I hope I am not intruding. I wanted to check on you, make sure you were doing all right." Catherine felt warmth spread through her chest. "I am doing as well as can be expected. Please come in, I just made coffee." He followed her into the kitchen, and she saw his eyes go to the dark stain on the floor. His expression tightened, but he did not comment on it. "I also wanted to talk to you about something practical," Michael said as he accepted a cup of coffee. "The Diamond K is always looking for good hands, and I know you are living out here alone. If you ever need help with repairs or heavy work around the property, you just send word. A lot of the boys at the ranch feel real bad about what happened, and they would be happy to help out." Catherine nodded slowly. That is kind of you. I confess, there are some things I have been putting off because I do not have the strength to manage them alone. The roof leaks in two places, and the fence around the garden is falling down. I can take care of the fence this afternoon if you like, Michael offered. And I will bring a couple of men out later this week for the roof. You do not have to do that. I want to. He looked at her directly, his hazel eyes steady. Katherine, if I may call you that, you have been through hell. Let people help you. Let me help you. The use of her first name sent a little shiver through her, but it was not unpleasant. All right, she said. Thank you, Michael. He smiled, that same transformative smile she had seen the day before, and Katherine found herself smiling back. Michael was as good as his word. He spent the afternoon repairing her garden fence, working steadily in the summer heat while Katherine tried to focus on her own tasks inside the house. She found herself watching him through the window more often than she should, admiring the easy competence with which he worked. He had shed his shirt in the heat, and she could see the muscles of his back and shoulders moving beneath sun-bronzed skin. She brought him water and lemonade throughout the afternoon, and each time they talked a little more. He told her about the Diamond K, about the owner, a gruff but fair man named Samuel Jenkins, who had built the ranch from nothing over the past 15 years. He told her about the other cowboys, men with names like Red and Dusty and Hooks, each with their own stories and quirks. He made her laugh with tales of cattle drives gone wrong and horses with more personality than sense. In turn, Katherine found herself opening up in ways she had not expected. She told him about her father's dreams of striking it rich in the silver mines, dreams that had never quite come true. She told him about learning to be self-sufficient, about the small garden she tended, and the chickens she kept, and the sewing she did for extra money. She told him about feeling trapped in El Dorado Canyon, surrounded by neighbors who smiled to her face but gossiped about her behind her back. People talk, Michael said, hammering in a fence post. Especially in small towns. They see a young woman living alone, and they make assumptions. Most of it is just noise. You know who you are. That is what matters. Do you really believe that? He paused and looked at her. I believe that the opinion of small minds should not dictate how you live your life. And I believe that anyone who took the time to actually know you would see what I see, a strong, brave woman who has survived more than most people could handle. Katherine felt her cheeks flush. You do not know me that well. Then I would like to, Michael said simply, if you would let me. The air between them seemed to thicken. Katherine was suddenly very aware of how close they were standing, of the way the late afternoon sun caught the gold flecks in his eyes. I would like that too, she said softly. Over the next few weeks, Michael became a regular presence in Katherine's life. He came by every few days, sometimes with work to do on the property, sometimes just to visit. They fell into an easy companionship, talking and laughing and slowly learning each other's rhythms. Michael taught her how to shoot his rifle, setting up targets in the yard and patiently correcting her stance. Katherine taught him how to make decent coffee and bake biscuits that did not resemble rocks. The town noticed, of course. El Dorado Canyon was too small for anything to go unnoticed. Katherine heard the whispers when she went to the general store or the post office speculation about her relationship with the cowboy, questions about whether it was proper for them to spend so much time together unchaperoned. Mrs. Aldridge, who now managed the store after Sullivan's death, made pointed comments about the importance of maintaining respectability. Katherine tried not to care. Michael had been right about the noise of small minds, but it was hard not to feel the weight of judgment, especially from people who had been so quick to believe the worst of her during the trial. One evening, as they sat on her porch watching the sun paint the canyon walls in shades of orange and red, Katherine voiced her frustration. Sometimes I think about leaving, she said, packing up everything and moving somewhere no one knows me, where I would not have to see the suspicion in people's eyes every time I walk down the street. Michael was quiet for a moment. Would leaving make you happy? I do not know, maybe. Or maybe I would just feel like I was running away. There is no shame in starting over somewhere new, Michael said. But I hope you do not go. I would miss you. The simple honesty of the statement made Catherine's heart skip. She turned to look at him, this man who had become so important to her in such a short time. Would you really? Catherine, I think about you all the time, Michael said, his voice low and earnest. When I am working cattle, when I am sitting by the campfire at night, when I wake up in the morning, you are always there in my thoughts. And I know we have not known each other long, but I cannot help the way I feel. How do you feel? Catherine barely breathed the words. Michael reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle. I think I am falling in love with you. I did not plan for it to happen. I came to that trial just to tell the truth, to do the right thing. But then I got to know you, and every day I spend with you makes me more certain that you are the most remarkable woman I have ever met. You are strong and kind and resilient. You make me want to be a better man. Catherine felt tears prick her eyes, but they were good tears, the kind that came from overwhelming emotion rather than pain. Michael, I do not know what to say. You do not have to say anything, he assured her. I just wanted you to know. Whatever you decide to do, wherever you go, I will support you. But if you stay, if you give me a chance, I promise I will spend every day trying to make you happy. Catherine squeezed his hand, feeling the warmth and strength in his grip. I think I am falling in love with you too, she admitted. It scares me. After everything that happened with Sullivan, I did not think I would ever trust a man again. But you are different. You have been nothing but good to me. You make me feel safe and valued and seen. Michael lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, a gesture so tender it made her breath catch. You are safe with me, he said. Always. I would never hurt you, Catherine. I would rather cut off my own hand than cause you pain. I believe you, she whispered. They sat there as the darkness fell and the stars began to emerge, hands clasped, and Catherine felt something settle inside her, a sense of rightness, of pieces falling into place. She had been through something terrible, something that would mark her for the rest of her life, but she had survived, and now impossibly she was finding happiness on the other side of that darkness. Michael kissed her for the first time that night, a sweet, careful kiss that tasted like possibility. Catherine kissed him back, her hand coming up to cup his face, and felt the last of her fear begin to dissolve. The summer turned to autumn, and the relationship between Catherine and Michael deepened. He courted her properly, or as properly as was possible in a place as rough and isolated as El Dorado Canyon. He brought her wildflowers from the high country and interesting rocks he found while working the range. She made him shirts and mended his clothes and packed him lunches for long days away from the ranch. They went on walks through the canyon, exploring hidden trails and cooling off in the creek that ran through the valley. They attended church together on Sundays, sitting in the back pew and enduring the stares and whispers with their heads held high. Some people in town never forgave Catherine for killing Sullivan, even in self-defense. They saw her as a scarlet woman, a murderess who had seduced an innocent man and then claimed assault when things went wrong. But others came around. Mrs. Chen from the boarding house started inviting Catherine for tea. Sheriff Dawson tipped his hat when he saw her on the street. Even Mrs. Aldridge softened eventually, admitting that she had seen sides of Sullivan she had not wanted to acknowledge. Michael never wavered in his support. When someone made a snide comment in his hearing, he shut them down with a look or a few well-chosen words. He made it clear that Catherine was under his protection, and that anyone who disrespected her would answer to him. It should have felt stifling, but it did not. Catherine had spent so long fighting alone that it was a relief to have someone standing beside her. In October, Michael asked her to marry him. They were sitting by the creek, watching the cottonwood trees turn gold, when he pulled a small ring from his pocket. It was simple, just a thin gold band, but Catherine loved it immediately. I know I do not have much to offer, Michael said, suddenly nervous in a way she had never seen him. I am just a cowboy, and my wages are not grand. But I love you, Catherine, more than I thought it was possible to love anyone. And if you will have me, I promise to spend the rest of my life making you happy. I will work hard and build us a good life. We can stay here if you want, or we can go somewhere else and start fresh. Whatever you need, I will do it. Catherine did not hesitate. Yes, she said, tears streaming down her face. Yes, I will marry you. Michael slipped the ring onto her finger and kissed her deeply, and Catherine felt a joy so fierce it was almost painful. After everything she had been through, after all the darkness and fear, she had found this love, real and true and transformative. They were married in November in the same church where they had endured so many judgmental stares. Reverend Thompson performed the ceremony, and Samuel Jenkins stood up as Michael's best man. Mrs. Chen and Sheriff Dawson attended, along with a handful of other townspeople who had come to accept Catherine. Most of the Diamond K ranch hands showed up, scrubbed and uncomfortable in their Sunday clothes, cheering when Michael kissed his bride. Catherine wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved and altered to fit. Michael wore a new suit he had bought in Las Vegas, looking handsome and slightly uncomfortable in the formal clothes. But when he said his vows, his voice was steady and sure. I, Michael Kane, take you, Katherine Hayes, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to love you, honor you, protect you, and cherish you for all the days of my life. I promise to stand by you in good times and bad, in sickness and health, for richer or poorer. You are my partner, my love, and my best friend. I am the luckiest man alive. Catherine's voice shook as she said her own vows. I, Katherine Hayes, take you, Michael Kane, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to love you, honor you, support you, and cherish you for all the days of my life. You saved me in more ways than one. You saw me when I was invisible, believed me when I was doubted, and loved me when I felt unlovable. You are my hero, my partner, and the best man I have ever known. I will spend the rest of my life being grateful that you walked into that saloon. There was not a dry eye in the church. After the ceremony, the Diamond K hands threw a party at the ranch. There was music and dancing, roasted beef and corn, whiskey and beer flowing freely. Catherine danced with her new husband under the stars, feeling lighter than she had in months. The cowboys were boisterous and happy, welcoming her into their rough-hewn family with genuine warmth. Samuel Jenkins, a bear of a man with graying hair and kind eyes, pulled Catherine aside at one point in the evening. Michael is like a son to me, he said gruffly. One of the best men I have ever known. You treat him right, and he will move mountains for you. I know, Catherine said, and I promise I will. Jenkins nodded, satisfied. You are welcome here any time, Mrs. Kane. This ranch is your home now, too. The title Mrs. Kane still felt strange and wonderful. Catherine had gone from being a woman alone, suspected and judged, to being part of a family. It was almost too much to process. Michael and Catherine spent their first night as a married couple in a small cabin on the ranch that Jenkins had offered them until they could build their own place. It was cozy and warm, with a fireplace and a real bed and curtains on the windows. Catherine felt shy at first, nervous about what came next, but Michael was patient and tender. He made love to her slowly, carefully, whispering words of love and reassurance, and by the time they fell asleep in each other's arms, Catherine felt like she had finally come home. Life as a ranch wife was different from what Catherine had known, but she adapted quickly. She learned to cook for a crew of hungry cowboys, to preserve food for the winter, to doctor minor injuries and illnesses. She helped with the garden and the chickens, and she kept the small cabin organized and comfortable. Michael was gone for long stretches sometimes, working cattle in the high country or mending fences on the far reaches of the property, but he always came back to her, tired and dusty and smiling. They saved money diligently, planning for the future. Michael wanted to build them a real house, something with multiple rooms and a porch where they could sit in the evenings. Katherine wanted children someday, a family to fill the empty spaces in her heart. They talked about their dreams late into the night, making plans and building castles in the air. Winter came, cold and harsh in the high desert. The ranch settled into a slower rhythm, with the cowboys focusing on feeding the cattle and keeping the animals healthy. Catherine spent more time indoors, sewing and reading and teaching herself to play the harmonica she had found in a pawn shop. Michael taught her to play poker and checkers, and they spent long evenings by the fire, competing and laughing and simply enjoying each other's company. It was during one of those quiet winter evenings that Catherine realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but it was not until she missed her third monthly cycle that she felt certain. She told Michael on a snowy February night, watching his face carefully for his reaction. He stared at her for a moment, as if he had not quite heard correctly. Then his face broke into the widest smile she had ever seen. "A baby?" he said, his voice full of wonder. "We are going to have a baby." "Yes," Catherine said, laughing at his expression. "In late summer, I think. Are you happy?" Michael swept her up in his arms, spinning her around despite her shriek of protest. "Happy? Catherine, I am over the moon. I am going to be a father. We are going to be parents." He set her down carefully, suddenly worried. "Are you all right? Should you be standing? Do you need to sit down?" Catherine rolled her eyes fondly. "I am pregnant, not fragile. Women have been having babies since the dawn of time." "I know, but you are my wife, and that is my child you are carrying. I am allowed to worry." Over the next few months, Michael hovered like an anxious hen. He refused to let Catherine lift anything heavy, insisted she rest in the afternoons, and drove her slightly crazy with his concern. But it was sweet, too, in its way. He talked to her growing belly, telling the baby stories and singing off-key lullabies. He built a cradle with his own hands, sanding and polishing the wood until it was smooth as silk. He read every book on pregnancy and childbirth he could find, becoming an expert on things Catherine found both amusing and endearing. The other ranch hands teased him mercilessly, but they also pitched in to help. They took on extra shifts so Michael could spend more time with Catherine. They contributed money for baby clothes and supplies. They even organized a barn raising to get the new house built before the baby came, working from dawn to dusk for 3 straight weeks until the structure was complete. The house was small but beautiful, with 2 bedrooms, a kitchen with a real stove, and a parlor with windows that let in the morning light. Michael carved their initials into the beam over the front door, and Catherine cried when she saw it. "It is perfect," she said, her hand on her swollen belly. "Thank you. You deserve perfect," Michael said, kissing her temple. "You and our baby both." Their son was born on a hot August night in 1879, after 12 hours of labor that left Catherine exhausted but exhilarated. Mrs. Chen came out from town to serve as midwife, and she guided Catherine through the process with calm competence. Michael paced outside the bedroom, driving himself half mad with worry until Mrs. Chen finally called him in to meet his child. The baby was small and red and screaming, but to Catherine, he was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. Michael held his son with shaking hands, his eyes bright with tears. "Hello, little one," he whispered. "I am your papa. I have been waiting so long to meet you." They named him Thomas, after Catherine's father. Thomas Hayes, Kane, a strong name for a strong boy. He had Michael's hazel eyes and Catherine's dark hair, and from the moment he was born, he was loved beyond measure. The first year of parenthood was exhausting and wonderful. Thomas was a fussy baby, prone to colic and night wakings, and Catherine spent many long nights walking the floor with him while Michael tried to help in whatever way he could. But there were beautiful moments too, the first time Thomas smiled, the first time he laughed, the way he reached for his parents with chubby hands. Michael was a devoted father. He came home from work and immediately took the baby, giving Catherine a chance to rest. He changed diapers without complaint, sang to Thomas when he cried, and read to him from books even though the baby could not understand the words. He built toys and carved wooden animals, creating a small menagerie for his son. Catherine watched her husband with their child and fell in love with him all over again. This was the life she had dreamed of, but never thought she would have a home, a family, a partner who adored her. It was more than she had dared hope for in those dark days after Sullivan's attack. The years passed in a blur of happiness. Thomas grew into a bright, energetic toddler who kept his parents on their toes. The ranch prospered, and Michael was promoted to foreman, a position that came with more responsibility and better pay. They saved enough to buy a few head of cattle of their own, starting a small herd that they hoped would grow over time. When Thomas was 3, Catherine gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Sarah. She was easier than her brother had been, a calm, sweet-natured baby who slept through the night almost from the beginning. Thomas was fascinated by his little sister, wanting to help with everything and hovering over her cradle like a tiny guardian. 2 years after Sarah came another son, James, who had Michael's smile and a mischievous streak a mile wide. The house was full of noise and laughter and the controlled chaos of raising 3 children. Catherine was busy from dawn to dusk, but she had never been happier. This was the family she had always wanted, the home she had dreamed of. Michael thrived as a father. He taught Thomas to ride and rope, to respect the land and the animals. He played dolls with Sarah, his big hands clumsy but gentle. He chased James around the yard, letting the boy climb all over him like he was a human jungle gym. He loved his children fiercely and showed it every day. In the evenings, after the children were in bed, Michael and Catherine would sit on their porch and watch the stars. Sometimes they talked about their days. Sometimes they just sat in comfortable silence, hands clasped. These were Catherine's favorite moments, the quiet spaces where she could just be with the man she loved. "Do you ever think about that day?" Michael asked one evening. They were sitting on the porch swing, his arm around her shoulders. "The day I walked into the saloon?" "Sometimes," Catherine admitted. "Mostly I think about how different my life could have been. If you had not come, if you had not testified, I would have hanged. Our children would not exist. This life would not exist." "I think about it too," Michael said quietly, "and I thank God I made it to town in time. I cannot imagine a world without you in it." Catherine leaned into him, breathing in the familiar scent of leather and soap and the faint tang of wood smoke. "You saved me, Michael, not just from the judge, but from the darkness that was swallowing me. You gave me a reason to hope again." "You saved me too," he said. "I was drifting before I met you, just going through the motions. You gave me purpose. You gave me a home. You gave me everything that matters." They sat there as the night deepened, wrapped in each other and the life they had built together. The children grew. Thomas turned into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved books and animals. Sarah was her father's daughter, fearless and determined, always covered in dirt from whatever adventure she had gotten into. James was the charmer, quick with a smile and a joke, able to talk his way out of trouble more often than not. When Thomas was 10, he came home one day with questions about his mother's past. He had heard whispers in town, fragments of the story about the trial and Garrett Sullivan. Catherine had known this day would come, but she had dreaded it nonetheless. She sat down with all 3 children and told them the truth, in age-appropriate terms. She explained that a bad man had hurt her, that she had defended herself, and that their father had helped her when she needed it most. She did not go into the graphic details, but she did not sugarcoat it either. She wanted her children to understand that their mother was strong, that she had survived something terrible, and that there was no shame in her story. Thomas listened with wide eyes. Sarah looked outraged on her mother's behalf. James, only 5 years old, climbed into Catherine's lap and hugged her fiercely. "You are the bravest person I know, Mama," Thomas said when she finished. "Your father is the brave one," Catherine said. "He stood up for me when no one else would." "You are both brave," Sarah declared. And if anyone in town says anything mean about you, I will punch them in the nose." Michael, who had been listening from the doorway, laughed. "That is my girl, but let us try using words before we resort to violence." The children accepted the story with the resilience of youth, and life went on. Catherine was grateful for their understanding, and even more grateful that they were growing up in a home filled with love and security, so different from the loneliness she had known after her father's death. The ranch continued to prosper. Samuel Jenkins, now in his 70s, began talking about retirement. He had no children of his own, and he had come to view Michael as his heir. He offered to sell Michael the Diamond K at a fair price, with payments spread out over several years. It was a huge decision, and Michael and Catherine discussed it at length. Taking on the ranch would mean more responsibility, longer hours, and significant debt. But it would also mean security for their family, a legacy to pass down to their children. In the end, they decided to do it. Michael became the owner of the Diamond K in the spring of 1890, when Thomas was 11, Sarah was 8, and James was 6. It was a new chapter in their lives, and they approached it with hope and determination. The transition was not always easy. There were lean years when the cattle market was down, and harsh winters when they lost animals to cold and starvation. There were droughts that withered the grass and floods that washed out fences. But Michael was a skilled rancher, and Catherine was a skilled manager, and together they made the Diamond K not just survive, but thrive. As the children grew into teenagers, they took on more responsibility around the ranch. Thomas became Michael's right hand, learning every aspect of the business. Sarah proved to have a gift for handling horses, breaking and training them with patience and skill. James, the youngest, was the one who could fix anything mechanical, always tinkering with tools and machinery. Catherine watched her children become capable, confident young adults and felt a fierce pride. They were good people, raised with strong values and a solid work ethic. They would be ready to face whatever the world threw at them. In 1895, when Thomas was 16, he came home with a girl. Her name was Emily, and she was the daughter of a neighboring rancher. Thomas was clearly smitten, and Catherine liked the girl immediately. She was smart and kind, with a quick sense of humor and a love of horses that endeared her to Sarah. "Is this what it was like for you and Papa?" Thomas asked Catherine one evening, his face earnest. "Feeling like you found the person you were meant to be with?" Catherine smiled. "Yes, that is exactly what it is like. Your father is my best friend and my partner. We have built a life together, and every day I am grateful for him. If Emily makes you feel that way, then you are a lucky young man." "I am lucky," Thomas agreed. "I just hope I can be as good a husband as Papa is." "You will be," Catherine assured him. "You have learned from the best." Over the next few years, Catherine and Michael watched their children navigate the path to adulthood. Thomas and Emily were married in 1898 in a beautiful ceremony at the ranch. Sarah announced that she wanted to start a horse breeding program on the Diamond K, focusing on producing strong, reliable ranch horses. James, at 15, declared his intention to study engineering, wanting to learn about the new machinery and technology that was transforming the West. Catherine and Michael supported all of their children's dreams, even when it meant adjusting their own plans. They were in their early 40s now, and they had spent more than 20 years building the ranch and raising their family. They were ready to start stepping back a little to let the next generation take the reins, but they were not ready to stop living. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1899, Michael surprised Catherine with a trip to San Francisco. It was the first time she had been to a real city in decades, and she was overwhelmed by the size and bustle of it all. They stayed in a fancy hotel, ate at restaurants, and attended a play at a proper theater. It was a magical week, a chance to be just a couple again rather than parents and ranchers. On their last night in the city, they walked along the waterfront, watching the sun set over the Pacific. "Do you ever regret it?" Michael asked. "Marrying a cowboy and spending your life on a dusty ranch? You could have had a very different life." Catherine stopped and turned to face him, taking both of his hands in hers. "Michael Kane, I have never regretted a single moment with you. You gave me everything I ever wanted: love, family, a home, a purpose. You saw me when I was invisible and believed in me when no one else did. You are the best decision I ever made, and I would choose you 1,000 times over. Michael's eyes were suspiciously bright. He pulled her close and kissed her, right there on the waterfront with people walking past, and Catherine kissed him back with all the love she had carried for him over the past 2 decades. They returned to the ranch renewed, ready for whatever the future held. The new century was coming, and with it change. But Catherine was not afraid. She had weathered worse storms and come through stronger. As long as she had Michael by her side, she could face anything. In 1901, Thomas and Emily welcomed their first child, a son they named after Michael. Catherine held her grandson and felt the circle of life complete itself. She was a grandmother now, a role she had never imagined during those dark days in the summer of 1878. Sarah found love too, marrying a quiet cowboy named Daniel who worked on a neighboring ranch. They settled on a piece of land adjacent to the Diamond K, starting their own small horse breeding operation with Sarah's expertise and Daniel's support. James went off to study in Denver, sending home letters full of excitement about electricity and automobiles and all the technological wonders of the modern age. He promised to come back and help modernize the ranch, to bring the Diamond K into the 20th century. Michael and Catherine watched it all unfold with joy and satisfaction. Their children were happy, building lives of their own while staying connected to the family and the land. The Diamond K was thriving, its future secure in the capable hands of the next generation. On a warm evening in June 1905, Catherine and Michael sat on their porch, watching their grandchildren play in the yard. Little Michael, now 4, was chasing after 2-year-old Grace, Sarah's daughter. Inside, Emily was expecting their second child, and Sarah had announced just last week that she was pregnant again. "We did well," Michael said, his arm around Catherine's shoulders. "Look at all of this. Our family, our home, our legacy. We built something real." Catherine leaned into him, feeling the same solid strength she had felt all those years ago when he had stood up for her in that saloon. "We did it together, every step of the way." "Do you remember what I said to the judge?" Michael asked. "That day in the saloon?" "You said a lot of things that day." "I told him that if the court punished you, the law would not be justice. It would just be another way for powerful men to silence the women they hurt." Michael paused. "I think about that sometimes, how close we came to losing everything before it even started." Catherine squeezed his hand. "But we did not lose it. You made them listen. You gave me a voice when mine was not enough. And you have spent every day since then making sure I knew my voice mattered." "It does matter," Michael said. "Everything about you matters. You are the center of my world, Katherine Kane. You always have been." They sat there as the sun set and the stars emerged, watching their grandchildren play and feeling the weight of all the years between that terrible day in the saloon and this perfect moment. It had not been an easy journey, but it had been worth every hardship, every struggle, every moment of doubt. Catherine thought about the woman she had been at 23, alone and afraid, standing trial for her life. She thought about Michael walking through those saloon doors like an avenging angel, ready to fight for a woman he barely knew. She thought about all the days and nights they had spent building this life, brick by brick, moment by moment. "I love you," she said, the words as true now as they had been the first time she spoke them. "I will love you until my last breath." "And I will love you beyond that," Michael promised, "into whatever comes next." The grandchildren's laughter rang out across the yard, and Catherine smiled. This was her legacy, not just the ranch or the land, but the family they had created, the love they had nurtured, the life they had built from the ashes of tragedy. The circuit judge had said her word meant nothing. A cowboy had testified for her and made them listen. But more than that, he had stayed. He had loved her through the darkest days and the brightest ones. He had given her everything she had lost, and more than she had ever dreamed of having. As the stars wheeled overhead and the night deepened around them, Catherine and Michael sat together on the porch of the home they had built, surrounded by the family they had raised, and knew that they had won something more precious than any verdict. They had won a lifetime of love, and that was worth more than all the gold in Nevada. The years continued to roll forward like the seasons, each one bringing new joys and new challenges to the Kane family. Michael and Catherine, now in their late 40s and early 50s, gradually stepped back from the day-to-day operations of the ranch, allowing Thomas to take over as the primary manager. But they never fully retired, always available to offer advice or lend a hand when needed. In 1910, James returned from Denver with a young wife named Margaret and a head full of ideas for modernizing the ranch. He installed windmills to pump water more efficiently and brought in one of the first motorized vehicles in the area, a truck that could haul supplies and equipment far faster than a wagon team. Michael was skeptical at first, but even he had to admit that some of the new technology made life easier. The ranch expanded its operations, adding sheep to complement the cattle business and developing new water sources that allowed them to graze more land. Sarah's horse breeding program gained a reputation throughout Nevada and beyond, with buyers coming from as far as California to purchase her well-trained animals. Catherine took great joy in her role as grandmother and matriarch of the growing Kane clan. By 1915, she had 7 grandchildren, with more on the way. She taught them to read and cook and sew, passed down the stories of her own childhood, and made sure they understood the values that had sustained their family through hard times. But she made sure they knew the full story, too. As each grandchild grew old enough to understand, Catherine told them about the trial, about Garrett Sullivan, about the day their grandfather had stood up for her when no one else would. She wanted them to know that their family's story was built on courage and justice, that speaking truth to power mattered, and that love could grow even in the darkest soil. The grandchildren listened with rapt attention, especially when Michael added his own perspective to the tale. He told them about riding into town and hearing about the trial, about the sick feeling in his gut when he realized Catherine might hang for defending herself, about standing before that judge and refusing to back down even when it would have been easier to stay silent. "Your grandmother is the bravest person I know," Michael told them. "She survived something that would have broken most people, and she did not just survive, she thrived. She built a life, raised a family, and never let fear or bitterness poison her heart. That is real strength." The grandchildren adored their grandparents, but none more so than young Michael, Thomas's eldest son. He followed his grandfather everywhere, mimicking his walk and his mannerisms, hanging on his every word. When he was 12, he asked Michael to teach him to shoot, and the two of them spent hours at the target range, the old man patiently correcting the boy's stance and aim, just as he had once done for Catherine. "Why did you testify for Grandma?" young Michael asked one afternoon as they walked back from the range. "I mean, I know she was innocent, but you did not really know her then. You could have just stayed out of it." Michael was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. "Because it was the right thing to do," he said finally. "And because I could not stand by and watch an innocent person be punished when I had the power to help. Your grandmother needed someone to believe her, to fight for her. I was in a position to do that, so I did. It is as simple and as complicated as that." "Were you scared?" The judge seemed pretty mean in Grandma's story. "Terrified," Michael admitted. "But being scared is not an excuse for doing nothing. Sometimes you have to do the hard thing, the scary thing, because it is right. That is what courage is, not the absence of fear, but acting despite it." Young Michael nodded thoughtfully, absorbing the lesson. These conversations would shape him, Catherine knew, just as the events of her own life had shaped her. The family story was becoming part of the next generation's foundation, a reminder of what they came from and what they stood for. In 1918, the Spanish flu swept through Nevada, and the Kane family held its collective breath, terrified of losing someone to the pandemic. They isolated as much as possible, limited their trips to town, and prayed fervently for protection. By the grace of God, or luck, or sheer stubbornness, the entire family survived, though several of them fell ill and took weeks to recover. Katherine nursed her family through the sickness, drawing on reserves of strength she had not known she possessed. Michael caught the flu and was dangerously ill for more than a week, and Katherine barely left his side during that time. She sat by his bed, bathing his fevered skin and forcing fluids down his throat, refusing to accept that she might lose him after all they had been through. When Michael finally turned the corner and began to recover, he was weak and thin, a shadow of his usual robust self. But his eyes were clear when he looked at Katherine, and his voice was steady when he spoke. "You saved my life," he said hoarsely. "You saved mine first," Katherine replied, tears streaming down her face. "And you have saved it every day since. I am not letting you go that easily, Michael Kane." He smiled, that familiar, wonderful smile that still made her heart skip after nearly 40 years of marriage. "I am not going anywhere. We still have too much living to do." The 1920s brought prosperity and change to the American West. The Diamond K continued to thrive, adapting to new markets and new technologies, while holding on to the traditions that had sustained it for decades. Thomas proved to be a wise and capable manager, and his siblings supported him fully, each contributing their own expertise to the family business. Katherine and Michael, now in their 60s, enjoyed a quieter life. They traveled occasionally, visiting James and Margaret in Denver or Sarah and Daniel at their horse ranch. They spent long hours with their grandchildren, passing down skills and stories. They sat on their porch in the evenings, hands clasped, talking about everything and nothing. On their 40th wedding anniversary in 1919, the whole family gathered at the Diamond K for a celebration. There was food and music and laughter, toasts and speeches and tears of joy. Katherine looked around at the faces of her children and grandchildren, at the home they had built and the life they had created, and felt a contentment so deep it was almost overwhelming. Michael stood up to make a speech, and the crowd fell silent. 40 years ago, he began, his voice still strong despite his age, "I married the most remarkable woman I had ever met. I knew I was lucky then, but I had no idea just how lucky I was. Katherine has been my partner, my best friend, my conscience, and my joy. She has given me 3 incredible children, and so far, 9 grandchildren. She has built a home that is the envy of every man I know. She has loved me through good times and bad, through sickness and health, through prosperity and hardship. She has made every day of the past 40 years worth living." He turned to Katherine, his eyes bright with emotion. "You asked me once if I ever regretted testifying for you that day in the saloon. Do you remember what I said?" Katherine nodded, her own eyes wet with tears. "I told you I would do it again in a heartbeat, and I want you to know, standing here 40 years later, that is still true. I would walk into that saloon 1,000 times if it meant spending my life with you. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Katherine Kane. You always have been, and you always will be." There was not a dry eye in the house as Michael raised his glass. "To my wife, my love, my life, may we have 40 more years together, and may every one of them be as blessed as the ones we have already shared." The family erupted in cheers and applause, and Katherine rose to embrace her husband, holding him tight as the celebration continued around them. The years that followed were gentle ones. Katherine and Michael grew old together gracefully, their hair turning silver, their steps slowing, but their love never dimming. They watched their grandchildren grow up and start families of their own, making them great-grandparents. They saw the Diamond K continue to prosper under Thomas's leadership. They witnessed the transformation of the West from the rough frontier they had known in their youth to something more settled and civilized. In 1925, on a warm September afternoon, Katherine and Michael sat on their porch as they had done thousands of times before. Katherine was 70, Michael was 73, and they had been married for 46 years. Their bodies were slower, their joints ached, but they were together, and that was all that mattered. Do you ever think about what your life would have been like if things had gone differently? Michael asked, his hand clasped in hers. If I had not made it to town in time, or if the judge had not listened? Katherine shook her head. I try not to think about that. It is too dark a path to walk down. I prefer to think about what did happen, that you came, that you testified, that you loved me, that we built this beautiful life together. It has been a good life, has it not? The best, Katherine agreed. Better than I ever dared to dream. You gave me that, Michael. You gave me everything. Michael squeezed her hand gently. We gave it to each other. That is how love works. It is not one person giving and another taking. It is both people building something together, brick by brick, day by day. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun begin its descent toward the horizon. In the distance, they could hear the laughter of their great-grandchildren playing in the yard, the sound of life continuing in all its messy, beautiful glory. I am tired, Michael said eventually, his voice soft. More tired than I have ever been. But I am happy. So deeply, profoundly happy. Katherine felt a flutter of concern, but she pushed it aside. They were old. Tiredness was to be expected. I am happy too. We have been so blessed. When my time comes, Michael said, still looking at the sunset, I want you to know that I have no regrets. Not a single one. Every moment with you was a gift. Every day was worth living. You made my life meaningful, Katherine. You were my purpose, my joy, my home. Michael, Katherine's voice caught. He turned to look at her, his hazel eyes still bright despite the lines and age. I mean it. I want you to know, when the time comes, that I died the happiest man alive. Because I loved you, and you loved me back, and that was enough. That was everything. Katherine squeezed his hand tightly, tears streaming down her face. I love you so much, more than words can say. I know, Michael said gently. I have always known, and I love you too. More than life itself. They sat there as the sun set, painting the canyon walls in shades of gold and crimson, and Katherine memorized every detail of the moment, the warmth of Michael's hand in hers, the sound of his breathing, the way the light caught the silver in his hair. She wanted to hold on to it forever, this perfect moment of peace and love and completion. Michael passed away peacefully in his sleep 3 weeks later. He went to bed one October evening and simply did not wake up. The doctor said it was his heart, that it had finally worn out after 73 years of beating. Katherine, lying beside him, had felt him take his last breath and had known somehow that he was gone. The grief was crushing, but it was also bearable in a way she had not expected. Michael had lived a full, rich life. He had died peacefully in his own bed, surrounded by the people he loved. He had left behind a legacy of children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, a thriving ranch, and countless lives he had touched with his kindness and integrity. And he had left Katherine with 46 years of memories, each one precious, each one a testament to the love they had shared. The funeral was huge, attended by people from all over Nevada and beyond. Michael Kane had been respected and loved by everyone who knew him, and they came to pay their respects. Katherine stood at the graveside, surrounded by her family, and listened as person after person spoke about what Michael had meant to them. Thomas talked about his father's wisdom and patience, about the lessons he had learned that would guide him for the rest of his life. Sarah spoke through tears about how her father had never doubted her dreams, even when they seemed impossible. James described his father as a man who embraced change while holding fast to his values, a man who looked forward without forgetting where he came from. But it was young Michael, now 27 and a father himself, who spoke the words that broke Katherine's heart and healed it at the same time. My grandfather once told me that courage is not the absence of fear, but acting despite it, he said, his voice steady. He showed me what that meant when he told me about the day he testified for my grandmother. He walked into that courtroom knowing he might make powerful enemies, knowing the judge might not listen, knowing he might fail. But he did it anyway because it was right. And because of his courage, all of us are here today. My father, my aunts and uncle, all of us grandchildren and great-grandchildren, we exist because my grandfather refused to stay silent when injustice was happening. That is his legacy. Not just this ranch or this family, but the knowledge that one person standing up at the right moment can change the entire course of the future. Katherine wept openly, and she was not alone. The entire assembly was in tears, mourning a good man and celebrating a life well lived. After the service, after the reception, after all the people had finally gone home, Katherine returned to the porch of the house she and Michael had built together. She sat in her usual spot and looked at the empty chair beside her, the chair that would never be filled again. The pain was enormous, a physical ache in her chest that made it hard to breathe. But underneath the pain was something else: gratitude. Deep, abiding gratitude for every moment they had shared, every laugh and tear and ordinary day. Michael had been the love of her life, and that love would sustain her through however many years she had left. Katherine lived for another 9 years, dying peacefully at the age of 79 in 1934. She remained sharp and engaged until the end, continuing to be the matriarch of the Kane family, the keeper of stories, the living link to the past. She told and retold the story of the trial and Michael's testimony, making sure that every generation understood where they came from and what they stood for. On the day she died, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, her last words were of Michael. "Tell him I'm coming," she whispered. "Tell him I never stopped loving him. Tell him to wait for me." And then she closed her eyes and slipped away, a peaceful smile on her face, finally reunited with the man who had saved her life and spent the rest of his own making sure she knew she was loved. The Kane family buried Katherine beside Michael on a hill overlooking the Diamond K, under the vast Nevada sky they had both loved so much. The funeral was attended by 4 generations of Kanes, each one a testament to the love story that had started on that hot summer day in 1878 when a cowboy walked into a saloon and refused to let an innocent woman be condemned. Thomas, now 65 and preparing to hand the ranch over to his own son, stood at his mother's grave and thought about everything she and his father had built. The ranch was prosperous, the family was strong, and the legacy of courage and love would continue for generations to come. "Thank you," he whispered, though whether he was speaking to his parents or to God or to the universe itself, he could not have said. "Thank you for showing us what love looks like. Thank you for teaching us to stand up for what is right. Thank you for building this family, this life, this legacy. We will carry it forward, we promise." The wind whispered through the canyon, carrying with it the scent of sage and dust and the promise of rain. The diamond case stretched out below, green and gold in the afternoon light, and somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed and horses whinnied and children played. The sound of life continuing, as it always had and always would. Katherine and Michael's story became a legend in El Dorado Canyon, passed down through generations. People told it around campfires and dinner tables, embellishing some details, forgetting others, but always maintaining the core truth. A woman had been in danger, a man had stood up for her, and their love had changed everything. The old courthouse in El Dorado Canyon, where Judge Pemberton had held his traveling court, eventually became a museum. Among the exhibits was a small display about the trial of Katherine Hayes, featuring the original court documents, newspaper clippings, and photographs of Katherine and Michael in their later years. Visitors would read the story and marvel at how close Katherine had come to being executed for defending herself, how one man's testimony had turned the tide, how justice had been served in the end. But the story was more than just a historical curiosity. It was a reminder that individual actions matter, that speaking truth to power can change lives, that love and courage can overcome even the darkest circumstances. Parents brought their children to the museum and told them about Catherine and Michael, using their story as a lesson about standing up for what is right, even when it is difficult or dangerous. The Diamond K Ranch remained in the Kane family for generations, each one adding their own chapter to the story, while honoring the foundation laid by Catherine and Michael. The house they built still stood, carefully maintained and modernized, but retaining its essential character. The porch where they had spent so many evenings still offered the same breathtaking view of the canyon. And in the parlor, hanging above the fireplace, was a photograph of Catherine and Michael on their 40th wedding anniversary, surrounded by their children and grandchildren, their faces alight with joy and love. Visitors to the ranch, whether family or friends, would inevitably be told the story of how it all began, of the trial, the testimony, the love that grew from the ashes of tragedy. And they would look at that photograph and see not just two elderly people, but the young woman who had fought for her life and the young man who had believed her when no one else would. And they would understand that this was what love looked like. Not perfect, not easy, but real and deep and transformative. The circuit judge had said her word meant nothing. He had been wrong. Catherine's word, amplified by Michael's courage, had echoed through the years, touching countless lives and shaping the future in ways neither of them could have imagined. And on certain quiet evenings, when the wind blew just right through El Dorado Canyon, older residents would swear they could still feel the presence of Catherine and Michael Kane sitting on that porch, hands clasped, watching the sunset together, and knowing that the love they had built would outlast them both, enduring as long as people told their story and carried their legacy forward into whatever future awaited. Their graves on the hill overlooking the Diamond Cave became a place of pilgrimage for the Kane family, a spot where weddings and anniversaries were celebrated, where difficult decisions were contemplated, where people came to remember where they came from and who they were meant to be. Fresh flowers always adorned the headstones, and the ground around them was carefully tended, a green oasis in the desert landscape. The epitaphs on their headstones were simple but profound. Michael Kane, 1852-1925. Beloved husband, father, and grandfather, he stood for justice when it mattered most. Katherine Hayes, Kane, 1855-1934. Beloved wife, mother, and grandmother. She survived, she thrived, she loved, and below both inscriptions, carved into the base of the shared monument, were the words that summarized their entire story. Two souls, one love, eternal. The sun set over El Dorado Canyon, as it had for millions of years, and would for millions more, painting the rocks in shades of fire and gold. The land endured, the stories endured, and most of all, the love endured, a testament to two people who had found each other in the darkest of circumstances and built something beautiful that would outlast them both, forever and always.